Chapter 3, Hazard Identification. Identifying hazards before you go into a confined space is a critical step in ensuring the safety of you and your coworkers. So while there are a ton of different hazards that you can be exposed to, let's break them down into 6 different categories: atmospheric, physical, chemical, biological, environmental, and psychological. So in terms of atmospheric hazards, I want you to be aware of the following 4 categories. Number 1, oxygen deficiency. Number 2, oxygen enrichment. Number 3, toxic gases and vapors. And number 4, flammable or explosive atmospheres. So what this is getting at is when you do your atmospheric testing before you go into a confined space. If your oxygen readings are below 19.5%, this can lead to asphyxiation and ultimately death. Even so, if your readings tell you that the oxygen levels are above 23.5%, this is bad because it can lead to an increased risk of fire or explosion. As for toxic gases and vapors, 3 common gases that you're going to be likely exposed to is going to be carbon monoxide, ammonia, and hydrogen sulfide. That's because it can be produced by various industrial processes, mixing chemicals, and even decaying matter. Just note, if you're using any flammable gases like propane, this can create a highly explosive atmosphere where it only needs one small spark to ignite. Physical hazards are going to be a risk classification that can cause a direct injury. So let's talk about the 4 that you're going to have the most exposure to. Number 1, engulfment. This is any material that can cave in and engulf you. This can be grain, sand, or even water. Number 2 is entrapment. These hazards, for the most part, usually deal with inwardly converging walls or even sloping floors. A really good example is a gravity-fed hopper. Number 3, mechanical hazards. These hazards should be easily identifiable because it's typically going to be moving equipment like gears, belts, and various other pieces of machinery. And number 4, slip, trip, and falls. One of the most common hazards that just about every employee can be exposed to can also be very prevalent inside a confined space. So make sure to keep an eye out for conditions like wet floors and poor housekeeping. Remember, these sort of hazards elevate the risk of every other hazard that you're going to be exposed to in a confined space. As for chemical exposure, this can happen through ingestion, absorption, or inhalation. So let's break down some of the chemicals that you might be exposed to into 2 different categories. The first is going to be corrosive. This is going to be your acids, your alkalis, and realistically any other solvent that, when exposed to your bare skin, can cause serious physical harm. And the second, reactive. Some chemicals by themselves pose little risk, but when you mix them together, it can cause a violent reaction. So make sure that you have an understanding of any of the chemicals that you're going to be using. Reference your SDS sheets just to make sure, and get your safety team involved for any additional guidance. Next up is going to be our biological agents. So again, let's break this down into 2 different categories. The first is going to be bacteria and viruses. If you're entering a confined space where you're exposed to stagnant water, sewage, or even dead or decaying matter, this is where this risk comes into play, and you need to make sure that you're properly protected. The second is going to be mold and fungi. For the most part, mold and fungi like dark, damp, and humid environments. So if you have a lot of experience with confined spaces, you've probably been in those environments more than you've been in dry ones. In most cases, the mold and fungi that you will encounter are going to be harmless, but that doesn't mean it can't cause some sort of an allergic reaction. But it's worth noting that some employees are more sensitive to mold and fungi, which can cause them to suffer from some symptoms while they're inside of a confined space. The next hazard is going to be about environmental conditions. So depending on where you live and where the confined space is, this risk can play a pivotal role in your overall safety while inside of a confined space. The first example is going to be temperature extremes. Excessive heat can lead to heat stress and even heat stroke. Even so, freezing cold temperatures when exposed to bare skin can cause serious permanent damage. In some extremely cold situations, frostbite can occur in minutes. The second environmental condition is going to deal with noise. So if you're inside of a confined space and you're using power tools, just remember this can amplify the noise level, and that amplified noise level can lead to hearing loss. Always protect your hearing. Once you start to lose it, you don't get it back. And the third environmental condition is going to be poor lighting. There are a ton of different confined spaces, but they usually share one common trait: darkness. What I want you to remember is that according to OSHA, inadequate lighting doubles the risk of an incident occurring to you or your coworkers. So before you go into a confined space, make sure that it's properly lit. Last but not least, let's take a quick second and talk about one of the most underrated hazards that you or your coworkers might be exposed to. The first is going to be claustrophobia. In a nutshell, this is the fear of being in an enclosed space or a confined space. While this can be a problem, is that you might not know that you're claustrophobic until you get down into a confined space. This can set off severe anxiety, causing panic attacks. So depending on several factors, just being in an uncomfortable confined space could heighten your stress level. So if you're inside of a confined space and you start to feel overwhelmed, make sure to communicate with your attendant and follow your evacuation procedures. So while we highlighted several hazards that you're most likely going to be exposed to, it goes without saying there are a ton more. Being able to identify hazards is the first step in making sure that you have a safe working environment. With that said, just identifying hazards doesn't solve the problem. So make sure that you assign effective countermeasures to each one of the hazards that you identify. A good way to remember this is going to be the hierarchy of risk controls. You start with elimination, then you go to substitution, then you go to engineering controls, then you go to administrative controls, and then finally, PPE. Remember, personal protective equipment should always be the last line of defense for hazards.